And good afternoon, everyone. It's 12:05 here on this Wednesday afternoon. You're listening to 90.3 FM, and Helping Seniors of Brevard gets underway right now. I'm John Harper. Let's get the show going with the Executive Director of Helping Seniors of Brevard and the host of our show, none other than Kerry Fink. Good afternoon, Kerry.
Hey, John Harper, and welcome to 2023. This is so exciting. Here we go into the new year. I believe it's going to be a good year. Do you have a good New Year's celebration, John?
Oh, it was interesting.
I think you said that about Christmas, too. But when I heard the story, I was like, wow, that was. Well, anyway, I just believe it's going to be a good year, and we're excited about the things that are coming up on the Helping Seniors front. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. But first, let me welcome you to Helping Seniors Radio. We gather around the radio every Wednesday lunchtime, 12 noon to 1 p.m. right here on 90.3 FM, WEJF. And welcome to those of you who listen online at WEJF.net and those who catch this later as a podcast. And boy, you are going to want to catch this show later because what we're about to talk about is going to be so important. There's this expression, what you don't know can hurt you. And boy, when we ran across this topic, we were like, you need to pay attention to this. So everything we do on the Helping Seniors front, Joe Steckler, our president and founder from day one, has always been about helping you make an aging plan. And what do we mean by that? This is kind of like we make hurricane plans here in Florida. It's like you don't want a hurricane, but you want to know what to do in advance when something bad may be headed your way. Hopefully your planning is never needed, but at least you're in good shape in case it is. So last year as a nonprofit organization, we sort of dubbed our year as we called it getting your ducks in a row, just trying to give a friendly euphemism to that term, building an aging plan. But what we actually mean by it is exactly what Joe talks about. Let's make an aging plan. And so one of the things that we've learned on our journey last year was there are things that you need to absolutely not try on your own. And one of the most complicated areas that we often are, I would even say, duped into thinking that we should try it on our own would be in the care of elder law. And what I mean by that is you see commercial after commercial on TV. This is, oh, it's so simple. We have forms for all 50 states, and you just log in here, and you'll be done, and it'll all be settled. And as you know, when we talk with our guest who is in the studio with us today, talking about board-certified elder law attorney Bill Johnson of William A. Johnson. By the way, Bill, Happy New Year. How was your New Year?
Happy New Year to you, Kerry.
You had a good one?
It was fantastic.
Good.
Yeah.
And your holidays were all pleasant and joyful?
Yeah, they were, yes.
Well, we have talked many times on the radio, Bill, about how dangerous it can be to try this stuff incorrectly. Either that maybe you pulled some forms out of an office supply store, or maybe you saw an ad on TV and you tried to do your own, or maybe there's a friend at church or work who said, oh, I can help you with that. And so they tried that. Or maybe you even had an attorney that was helpful to you in some other areas, but they didn't know elder law and they were trying to write stuff for you as a favor. And the problem that we've talked about over and over, Bill, is you don't know you're in trouble until there's no chance to redo these documents.
Once you sign something, that can be it. Exactly.
Yeah, which leads us to what we're going to talk about today. And I'm not kidding. This show is going to be a barn burner because I'm learning stuff talking with Bill even before we went on the air. And this started with a post that he had put out from the elder law section of the Florida Bar. And I thought, this is unbelievable that caring. This is what the post says. Caring for an aged loved one is difficult enough without the worry of getting stuck with a bill because of a rushed contract. When shopping for end-of-life care facilities, take a moment to ask important questions like, do you require a third-party guarantor? Well, that sounds pretty legalistic and archaic to me, but the net effect of this is, I guess, in this study that they found that 39% of Floridians who signed assisted living contracts for others were required to be personally responsible for paying the bill if their loved one couldn't. That's pretty significant, Bill.
That is. If you are a power of attorney for somebody and you are going to have them admitted into a facility, you want to, first off, make sure you sign everything as John Doe, power of attorney for Jane Doe, or sometimes it'll be John Doe, DPOA for Jane Doe, with DPOA being the acronym for Durable Power of Attorney.
Okay.
Some people sign John Doe, agent for Jane Doe, but you want to let the facility know that you are acting on behalf of somebody and you are not signing these papers to put any personal liability forth in your name.
Wow. I was thinking about this at the other end of the spectrum. A lot of times, when kids are trying to get their first car, the parents will be asked like, oh, you got to co-sign with your son or your daughter because they don't have the credit yet to get the car. And then a lot of parents have also been burned by the fact that son or daughter didn't make the payment. And then they come back to mom or dad and say, well, guess what? It's your car now. Well, it's actually not your car, but you still got to make the payments, right?
Correct. And that also occurs with sometimes they have co-signers on student loans.
Ooh.
And I've seen people get hit for hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Because the person
they were a co-signer.
Yeah. Wow. So this is actually what we're getting into. And this is why our operations director, Nancy Deerdorf, has an expression I love. Is like, how do you know what you don't know? And so while she's busy every day, we took over 5,000 calls last year. That was far and away a record for our little Helping Seniors of Brevard nonprofit, now into its 12th year of service here in Brevard County. But 5,000 calls last year, and she always is astounded by the requests that come in because there's always something new. And so much of this has to do with, well, I just didn't know. And Bill, we've talked about this so often. It's really dangerous financially and stress-wise, I think, to learn that this stuff you did has an unintended consequence after the fact. You want to get this right the first time.
Correct. And so I have a lot of people who come in. They have been named power of attorney for somebody. That person is now incapacitated. And I have people come in and say, I want to know what my personal liability is for acting as their power of attorney.
Wow.
Or they come in and they bring in the assisted living or nursing home contract, the admissions contract, and want us to look that over. And so we do that for people. Yeah. Some people are smart enough. Now, as I was telling you, sometimes it almost feels like purposefully they don't give people time to do that.
Right.
Like your loved one is shipped from the hospital to a nursing home. They'll tell you they'll be transferred sometime in the afternoon, which is anywhere from 12:01 to 7 p.m.
Right.
So you don't know when they're going to get there, and all of a sudden you get there, and your mother's in the nursing home, and you have to come down to the office and sign all the paperwork.
Wow.
And so you get down there, and they hand you this stack of papers and say, here, you got to sign all this. And you feel like you don't have any choice, because if you don't sign everything, then your mother's going to be kicked out of the nursing home. And it was hard enough to find the one she's in.
Right.
And so you never really, you think you don't have an opportunity to read these documents, and you're kind of being forced. And what you don't read can really come back to bite you, because there are certain clauses that they put in these contracts that really have some significant meaning if something goes wrong.
When you're saying that, I was thinking about, you're co-signing for your kid's car, but you didn't even know you co-signed about it, like we're talking about on some of these nursing home contracts. So it really behooves you to be careful about it. But I wanted to back up, if it's okay with you, to back up to one of the first things you said. You said a lot of times, particularly, I guess it would be somebody who's pretty astute, would come in and say, okay, they put me on here, I'm the power of attorney, but I want to make sure I do this right. How do you, because I bandy words about that I don't really know that are correct, but I feel like if you're a power attorney, you have like some sort of like fiduciary responsibility, like you're supposed to act in their behalf correctly or something?
Correct. Generally, you have to act in the best interest of the person you're acting for, and like they would with their money. You also are not supposed to self-deal typically, unless your power of attorney specifically says that. You also only have the powers that were specifically given to you in the document.
Okay.
So sometimes you don't have the power to do certain things because it's not in the document. So there are, those are some of the golden rules. As I mentioned, generally the first thing I tell everybody is make sure you sign in your capacity as the agent under the power of attorney. Don't sign in your individual name,
right,
because that is putting you on the hook.
So you said the term self-deal. I think I know what that means, but what does it mean? Does it mean I'm doing stuff that benefits
you?
Me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Generally, that's prohibited unless the power of attorney allows for that.
Okay, so here comes the power of attorney. They think they understand what they're supposed to do, and then they're off. Because we were talking before the show. This exactly happened in my family's case with my mom getting admitted. They discharged her from a hospital, sent her to a nursing home so she could get some rehab. And of course, you show up finding. They tell you at the hospital, well, mom is now over here. You're like, okay, so you run over there, and then somebody runs in with a clipboard, or like we were talking about, and sometimes now it's an iPad or something like that. But they're running in with a clipboard. Oh, you got to sign for this. You're and so they're standing there, kind of like impatiently tapping their foot, waiting for you to sign 42 pages, and you're sort of intimidated. And like you said, you don't want them to kick mom out of the place that she's in, and you're just intimidated, and so you probably could inadvertently sign something that maybe you regret later.
And they do the same thing at the hospital.
Yeah.
Like somebody comes in with the ambulance, and you're 3 feet behind them.
Yep.
And if they don't have the capacity to sign themselves in, then you have to sign them in. And again, if you're just doing it as the power of attorney or the healthcare surrogate, you got to make sure you denote what authority you're using.
Right.
Because that can have a big effect on who gets stuck with the bill.
Wow. And, I can see that this is kind of complicated because it's sort of that thing like, they just say, oh, this is the one that gives us authorization to do this. This is the one that gives us power to do that. But then we can, with this one you're signing, it just lets us blah, 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 bill the insurance company and all these things. But if you just take their word for it, you could end up signing something. And I don't think they're well, maybe they are, but I don't know. I assume the best of people till finding out differently, but I would assume that they're not sending you over the edge of Niagara in a barrel, but I mean, you don't know.
Well, these emissions agreements can be 30 pages long.
Yes.
I mean, they can be very thick documents with attachments and all kinds of things like that. And as you mentioned, if nowadays, a lot of places go paperless.
Right.
So now they hand it to you on an iPad, and you cannot go to the next page of the contract until you agree to the prior page. And so you're forced to agree to the contract otherwise you can't get to the end to sign it.
Yeah, and if you're not a strong-willed person and say, hey, it's not how I do business, you need to print this out, bring me a copy, I can read to it, which we can't do that, everybody in the office has already gone home today, blah, 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 you're going to get all this stuff because that's not the person's job. They're just supposed to get you to X off everything on their little iPad, right?
Correct. But,
wow.
A lot of people can't see what's on an iPad very good.
Well, true.
So, if you have vision problems and you can't read off an iPad, then I think under the American with Disabilities Act, you have a right to a hard paper copy that you can look at.
Well, and also like we were talking about, we were joking before the shows, we were talking about this topic. I said, it's like you unpackage a piece of new software for your computer, and the first thing it says is you agree to the license agreement. You have no idea what's in that license agreement, but you have two choices. You either agree to it or you find some other software.
And that's a great point because when it comes to nursing homes, there are protections under federal law that come into play that you can't make people sign certain things as a condition of having a patient admitted. And one of those things is you cannot make somebody other than the patient responsible for the bill. Okay? Now, And you cannot do it as a condition of admittance. So for many years, when I first started practicing, nursing homes would have a voluntary, in the package it would say voluntary personal guarantee.
Wow.
And people didn't know what that meant. People would sign that, meaning that you voluntarily agree to be liable for the bill.
Wow.
So that if Medicare or Medicaid didn't pick up the bill, you could be on the hook for tens of thousands of dollars.
Yeah, it goes back to Nancy's point. How do you know what you don't know?
Yeah, and now it's even gotten worse. Wow. I was telling you before the show that we were talking about what's going on up in the Northeast. And that has caused the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the federal government, they have issued basically a warning how you can help caregivers spot illegal nursing home debt collection practices. And they have a whole thing on their website. I'll just read you a little blurb. Some nursing home admissions contracts say that a caregiver, family member, or friend must pay the resident's bill if the resident can't afford to. This is generally illegal.
Wow.
Okay, so they don't mince their words. So what has happened is the attorneys who represent these nursing homes have gotten like a little wiser. So now they put in a clause basically to the effect that as the power of attorney, you agree to use all the resident's assets to pay the nursing home. Now, that means you can't pay for anything else for the resident other than the nursing home bill. Yeah. You're agreeing to that, which is probably a breach of your fiduciary duty, because people have other bills other than the nursing home bill.
Right.
And if you don't use all that person's money to pay the nursing home bill, in other words, you pay other bills and they run out of money, and the nursing home bill can't be paid, you agree to be liable for that.
Yeah, that's well, no, we got to save out because mom's got to pay taxes, and those people will get upset if you don't pay those taxes,
Correct. You couldn't even pay somebody's taxes.
Wow.
So it creates a huge problem, especially of who do you have a duty to?
Yeah.
Because your duty is actually to the patient, not to the nursing home.
Sure.
And that creates a big headache. So they bury these clauses in there, and up in the Northeast right now, they are using those quite aggressively and going after people in court for the payment. And I know of 2 cases in Brevard County where nursing home has done that as well.
Wow.
Which I still think is generally illegal. To make anybody liable personally for any part of the bill, it doesn't matter, is probably illegal.
Well, it's an incredible situation when you think about it because, again, we've talked about this so often. Again, Joe Steckler, our president and founder, he's always talked about the need to plan ahead. In fact, that's one of the main things we try to do in addition to our Helping Seniors info line, which is where people are calling in kind of trying to solve problems typically after the fact. But the reason why we spend so much time on the education portion, like the radio, the television, the different things, is we're trying to get people to think a step or two ahead about where things may wind up so you don't have to find yourself in a pickle when you're already in the middle of a very stressful situation. And I keep thinking, Bill, as we're talking about this, you don't usually get a lot of time to make a decision, particularly about if you're coming from a hospital going to a skilled nursing facility, right? Because they're ready to have mom out of there like yesterday. Once it's time for her to go, they want her at the facility, and then you're trying to get all that organized. And like you said, they may have transported her even before you get over there, and now they're chasing you down the hall with this paperwork or this iPad, which is even worse. What would be your advice to somebody who's trying to be responsible? Do you just say, hey, listen, I need to see this in writing, or I need to take some time to read this, or what?
You can always do that.
Yeah.
There's nothing that says you have to sign it right there and then. It seems that way.
That's how they make you feel.
Yeah, I can tell you that's how they make it feel. But you can't take it home and bring it to a lawyer. You know, a contract is supposed to be a give and take between two parties,
right,
equally situated. So when you start talking about pressure sales, that's not exactly what a contract should be. So you do have the right to take that contract and go home and review it prior to signing it.
What would be reasonable? Like I'm just thinking like if, like I said, by grace of God, I didn't have any problems like that. But now if I think back, I wonder if I signed something that was probably stupid of me to do because I thought I was doing the right thing, but had no idea actually, in retrospect.
Well, if you're going to go to a lawyer, make the appointment with a lawyer and then tell the facility, I'm going to have my lawyer review this. I'll get back to you on whatever that date is.
Yeah.
And hopefully they give you the time to do that.
Is there a rule that it would be unreasonable if they didn't give you like if they said, well, you got to bring this back, by.
Well, I think they run the risk of having the contract unenforceable. That would be the downside is the judge says, hey, you didn't give them an opportunity to have their lawyer look at this prior to signing it.
Right.
So that would be something that we would have, you would have to look at, or a defense to some of that. Now, remember, it is illegal to make somebody else responsible for a nursing home bill other than the patient. And that only occurs if it is a condition of them going into the facility. Now, there are no such protections in the world of assisted living.
Wow, we're gonna have a lot to talk about in the second half of the show about that. We're talking with board-certified elder law attorney Bill Johnson of William A. Johnson, and we're having a really good show where we're getting a chance to talk about some stuff that, if you don't know, really could put you in a dangerous situation. And I guess the problem with all this stuff, Bill, is you don't know about it until, something, you could find out about this months or even a year or so after something has transpired. They're going to reach back and say, well, your insurance company never paid this, so now we're going to talk to you about this, and you got to pay it.
Well, the downside is, say the facility doesn't get paid, or you apply for Medicaid, but you're not approved, and all of a sudden there's a bill.
Yeah.
And 3 months in nursing home is about $36,000.
Wow.
So most people don't have that just laying around to pay, and so you could have a really big, huge debt on your hands very quickly. And if you don't know what your rights are, you may get stuck with that.
Yeah, well, let's just suppose somebody signed something last night and they're listening to this radio show and they may be at this point freaking out, or maybe they just want to plan ahead. How would they reach your office and say, wow, you really opened my eyes. How do I reach you?
You could give us a call at 321-253-1667.
We're talking with board-certified elder law attorney Bill Johnson of William A. Johnson, longtime friend of the Helping Seniors organization, and we're going to dive deeper into this. We're going to start talking about assisted living contracts and more on the second half of our show on today. So stay tuned.
And it's nice to hear that music signifying the start of our second half hour of Helping Seniors of Brevard. I'm John Harper, and let me introduce to you right now the Executive Director of Helping Seniors of Brevard and the host of the said named show, Kerry Fink. And Kerry, you and Bill Johnson have a great conversation going on here.
Oh, this is like an off-the-chart conversation. Thanks, Bill. Welcome back to the second half of today's Helping Seniors radio show. We always gather around the radio at lunchtime on Wednesdays, and we are starting off 2023 with a bang, because this is really, really important information. It goes back to this whole concept, what you don't know can hurt you. So welcome back to 90.3 FM WEJF radio station. For those of you listening online at WEJF.net, welcome back as well. And those who are catching this as a podcast, you already have figured out what an important conversation we're having today with board-certified elder law attorney Bill Johnson of the law office of William A. Johnson. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Wow, this is incredible. We started with something that you had posted out on your Facebook page, which was an interesting statistic that I'd never even thought about, and it really has given us a great area to talk about because it's really, I didn't realize it was this much of a deal. 39%. You know, that's literally 4 out of 10 Floridians who signed assisted living contracts for others were required to be personally responsible for paying the bill if their loved one couldn't. And I wonder, out of those people, how many knew they actually had done that?
That's a great question. You know, especially if they didn't have time to read the contract or it was on a tablet or something. But unlike nursing homes, assisted livings, they can require that.
You know, we spent really the first half of the show talking about some of the perhaps sneaky ways that maybe some unscrupulous skilled nursing facilities, and particularly you were talking about some of them up north, had inserted language in. So these poor people are under the stress and duress of trying to get, you know, their loved one situated, sign something, probably didn't take all the precaution that they would normally take, you know, and signed something away, and now they've got a legal problem to fight. But then, as we were talking about during the mid-show break, apparently you have to be careful even if you're signing an assisted living agreement, right?
Correct, because there could be personal liability there as well. So if you're acting under a power of attorney, you would want to, again, denote your agency.
Yeah.
That you are, you know, the agent under the power of attorney, and you're signing the documents not as yourself individually, but on behalf of the patient.
See, so the argument that this brings up for us to think about, and remember, as Helping Seniors of Brevard, we're a Florida 501c3, a little small nonprofit for 12 years, has been a little engine that could here in Brevard County. We've operated the county's senior information helpline for all these years. It's a free call, 321-473-7770. I'm going to say that number again so you could grab a pencil and jot it down, but the Senior Information Helpline from Helping Seniors, the phone number, is area code 321-473-7770. And Nancy Deerdorf, who's our operation director and takes these calls, you know, she's got 33 years registered nurse experience. She ran one of the area's largest home health agencies, and she has just a real passion for helping seniors. The same way Joe Steckler, our president and founder, does. You know, Joe's a retired Navy captain, just turned 89, Bill. Can you believe that? Wow. Turned 89 in December. Wow. Well, happy birthday, Joe, and Happy New Year, Joe. And so one of the things, though, that both of these guys you have really spent a lot of time talking about is you take the time and get this stuff right, because, again, if you make these mistakes, they can really be harmful. And I was thinking about this. If you decide you're going to buy a house, you probably spend a long time in the process because you have to go through putting a mortgage together. You're having to really review all the documents. What's your payment going to be? How do the taxes work? All those kind of things. So you probably have a real estate attorney, or at the very least, you're probably going to have your real estate agent walk through the agreement and make sure everything's thought about. But I don't know that always happens in an assisted living case, because a lot of times it's like, well, Mom can't really return home safely, so now we're going to have to sort that out separately. But right now we got to get her into assisted living because she can't stay at the skilled nursing facility. So again, you're making all these decisions with time pressure without really having necessarily had the chance to shop around and think about the best thing. And then you could maybe get treed on the agreement if you're not careful.
Well, usually you have a little more time on an assisted living because there's not the medical emergency.
Right.
Because when you're going to a skilled nursing facility, initially at least, a lot of times it's for rehabilitation.
Right.
And you've been in the hospital. Assisted living, you could be more coming out of your, from your house into assisted living. So generally you have a little more time. So it's always behooves you to have an attorney look over that agreement. There may be things in there that you don't want to agree to. I think before we started today's radio show, I was telling you one of the things that gets snuck into nursing home and assisted living agreements is a waiver of your right to trial by jury, where you instead agree that it will go to arbitration. And subsequently, you have to read those very carefully because it all depends who the arbitrators are.
Yeah, I was asking you, it seems so fair because it says by the American Arbitration Association, and it just seems like, wow, we're just saving all this money by not going to court. And then you were saying, not so fast. You need to understand how this oftentimes works.
Yeah, in fact, usually the arbitration clause picks who the arbitrator is going to be.
Wow.
And I can tell you, I used to work with a pool company, and in their contract, the arbitrators were the National Spa and Pool Association. And so, do you think you're going to get a fair shake if you had a disagreement on your pool contract?
It seems tough.
Right. And the same is true with stockbroker agreements. When you sign up with a brokerage firm, you agree to arbitration. And that is usually done through the National Association of Securities Dealers, I believe.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
part of that contract, when you signed up for the brokerage account, is that you agree to arbitration.
Wow.
So you can waive some very big rights by doing that. And again, it all depends who the arbitrators are going to be.
Yeah.
Because the deck may get stacked against you.
Yeah.
So that is something to consider as well. And again, the courts, at least from what I've seen lately, the courts have, as long as the power of attorney agent has the right to contract given to them in the power of attorney, the courts have generally said that's enough for them to contract that you will go to arbitration.
Wow.
So you can rest assured my power of attorney says they do not have that right, notwithstanding anything to the contrary in this power of attorney. So, but that's another way they try to get you to agree to something you probably shouldn't be agreeing to.
Well, it's a fascinating thing because most of this comes down to both the discussion we had in the first part of the show where we're talking about assisted living, and even as we're about skilled nursing facilities, and now where we're talking about assisted living, it still really comes back to a couple of things. We've had this kind of underlying theme that says, let's get your ducks in a row, meaning let's plan these things ahead. I have sat down everybody that's connected with the Helping Seniors organization in terms of assisted living facilities, and I'm naming a name here, Greg Kennedy and Alfredo Chavaria with Zon Beachside. They go out of their way to say, listen, we want people to get here, call us years before you think you may need this place. Come take a tour, learn what it's all about. Don't be trying to make these decisions in an emergency kind of situation like, well, we got to put mom someplace, so we got to do something real quick. But they really advocate for getting ahead of the curve. I know the same, I've talked with Ashley and the team over at Hibiscus Court, and they feel the same way. It's like, just get them to come by now while there's not an emergency so we can explain how everything works. There's plenty of time. There's no rush. And that's really the same thing that I think the point that we're trying to get across today is don't do these things in an emergency, just like you would have, an attorney look over a house contract before you invested all that money. You would want an attorney who understands all these particulars to go over this paperwork with you because, it might be an hour's worth of the attorney's time, but what would be the downside if you botch this? They're going to come for you for tens of thousands of dollars.
Correct. And there are other unique areas where the power of attorney can get a little complicated.
Yeah.
Too is with banks. Generally, if you go to a bank, they have up to 72 hours to determine whether or not they're going to accept the power of attorney.
Wow.
So you may not get access right away to some funds.
Yeah, we've been over this whole this power of attorney stuff is don't try this on your own. And I think one of the surprising things to maybe a lot of people, because I just read, here we go, read an article again this morning about talking about how many people are moving into our state of Florida. They're exiting places supposedly like California or New York or whatever, and they're all coming to Florida. Well, y'all are welcome here. But you need to know that there may be some differences in how your power of attorney works here than it did where you came from.
Exactly. I think we've talked on the show about powers of attorney and how it may be open to a different interpretation here than in the state you came from originally.
Because here, I think, isn't the basic point that here the power of attorney is much more specific. You can't just go, oh, they can handle everything, right?
It's scrutinized much more.
Yeah.
So if you don't specifically give somebody a power, they don't have it. So specificity is what is needed, where some places it can just be general grants of authority.
Which is why I guess probably you like putting in that line about the power of attorney does not have the power to waive a jury trial.
Yeah, so we specifically take that right. The other thing that's interesting, just to get off the track here for a while, is a lot of people don't know, in Florida, you're not liable for your spouse's debts.
See, that was important because I was asking you about, like, we go to the skilled nursing facility, and it's one thing you're signing as son or daughter, but what if it's your husband or wife that you're now having to sign for?
And of course, if they're going into the assisted living, you could be agreeing to be responsible for the bill.
Right.
Or even worse, if they're going in the hospital and you sign the admissions contract, you may be, again, being personally liable for the unpaid portion of any hospital bill. So again, if you are the husband or wife of the patient, you probably want to sign all these documents, again, in your capacity as the agent under a power of attorney.
Wow.
Because you're not responsible for your spouse's bills unless, of course, you agree to be.
Wow.
And if you agree to be, then you could be held.
Well, I wonder how many of us think about that because, you get to the hospital, it's an emergency, and you want your spouse to be well, So you're just signing stuff like, is she going to be okay? Is he going to be okay? Or whatever the case is. And you have no idea, again, what you're signing if you don't know what you're signing.
Correct.
Wow. So let me take a turn on this, like, because I was asking you before the show. I said, you could get in trouble real quick just because you didn't know. I mean, it was, you think you're responsible. You're trying to read the contract. They really didn't give you a chance. Or like we were joking about before, maybe not joking. Somebody hands you a tablet. You can't even advance to the next page without, clicking I accept to get to the next page so you can finally sign it. You maybe really didn't have a good understanding of what you signed, and could that potentially be part of your defense when they come after you and say, "Hey, you forgot about this little asterisk here"?
I would think so. Think so, but we don't. This is all new stuff that's happening, so we don't have a lot of cases, as far as I know, on that issue.
Yeah.
Electronic signatures and electronic contracts is a fairly new area.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it really comes back to why we really plead very, very extensively about this. You got to get a team of people together that you trust to help you create your aging plan or helping you get your ducks in a row. And so this year, as an organization, we're continuing along with the same theme that we used last year, which was get your ducks in a row, but we've added a corollary. Don't try this on your own, because we've done so many shows, Bill Johnson, board certified elder law attorney, where we've talked about the trouble that we can inadvertently get ourselves in, because maybe we tried to do our own estate planning documents and then figured out it was all fouled up when there was no hope to rectify it. And things like that. So one of the things that I wanted to share with folks, and I want to give you a minute to get a pencil and jot this down, because there's an important conversation that you're going to be leading, Bill Johnson, on February 27th. So on the last Monday of each month, we do a thing that we've done for actually a number of years now. It started actually before there was such a thing as COVID. It's called the Senior Resource Center of Brevard Community Information Series. And it's a simple event the last Monday of every month where we literally take 55 minutes. We pledge to keep you inside a 55-minute window. And what we also pledge to do is give you information that will really help you develop your own aging plan. And so, for example, last year we spent a lot of time, we talked about a lot of the important legal documents that you need, but throughout the year we also covered topics like financial considerations, like when do you take Social Security? What are the things that you need to do, whether it makes sense to delay Social Security? All those kind of things. What's your retirement planning going to look like? We talked about, hey, I want to live safely at home as I get older. What kind of things do I need to think about help in the home? We talked about things like, well, maybe I'm open to downsizing. How do I make the right choices about what would be next in my life? We covered all those things. And so this year we're getting a little bit more specific in some of this because we're going to talk really about these topics that are so important. In fact, you're writing the keynote article for the February edition of the Helping Seniors News, which is your legal checklist, and you're gonna probably walk us through some of these things that we've been talking about and some of the dangers if we don't. But that's also what you're going to be presenting February 27th. The time is 10:30 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. We're going to be meeting at Buena Vida Estates. So that's right there on US, it's on US 192, or what do they call it, New Haven Avenue, is where we're going to be. And you can RSVP by calling Nancy at 321-473-7770 because they're coming up with a slightly different thing for us this year. It's fun. They're going to have coffee and stuff there at the meeting, but then when you come, they're going to send you home with a lunch from none other than Chef Jillian of Chefs for Seniors. She's going to provide your lunch. And on February, Bill, you're going to be leading us through things that we want to think about on our legal checklist so that we can get our planning correct.
Well, that'll be great. I look forward to it.
And every time we sit down, I keep learning stuff that we just never even had a chance to even imagine. And this is why I think it's so dangerous to just try to Google stuff on the internet, because you get all these results back. We all know the axiom, if it's on the internet, it must be true because every single thing is vetted correctly, right? And, as you've pointed out time and again, Bill, everything is different from state to state. So something that may be permitted in one state is not necessarily allowed here, or vice versa.
That is very true. And that's why even if you move states, you should have the documents looked at, especially your power of attorney and your will and trust, to make sure will be at least interpreted the way you want them to be.
That's such a good point. And here we are, this is the first Wednesday in the new year. Our guest is board certified elder law attorney Bill Johnson of the Law Office of William A. Johnson. And as we all are good about making New Year's resolutions, the things we want to do. Maybe one of the things that probably is a good thing to do is this would be a great time to pull out those documents and ask an elder law attorney like Bill to have a look at. Because, number one, you might have moved in from another state, and even though you had a great elder law firm maybe put those together for you in Indiana or something, you want to make sure that it's going to work the way you want in Florida, number one. Number two, what if you did this here in Florida? You've lived in Florida for years, but maybe you did this 10 or 15 years ago. Are all those things still accurate? I guess that's something you run into a lot. Maybe the person you wanted to name to help you is not necessarily that person, or they may not be around to help you.
That's a great point. Generally, you should review it every 5 years, but you should also review it every time there's a major life event. Like you've moved states, or there's been a marriage, a divorce, a death, birth, any of those things. Yeah, you should have it looked at.
And then there's also the complicated stuff about these, like when like you said, like a marriage happens and there's kids from each marriage or things like that, and everybody has an idea about how they want it to go, but does the paperwork actually reflect that correctly?
That is true. I just had a lady in my office who was supposed to inherit something, and somehow that never got done.
Wow.
So, and of course, you can make people obviously are very upset at that point.
No doubt. Well, I'm sure you see all sides of it, but Bill, you're really generous with your time. You're going to come out and share with us on February 27th at this particular event. But I also know you do a lot of events, for example, at One Senior Center, because you're really about getting people ahead of that aging curve. If somebody wants to find out more about these events, maybe they want to ask you a specific question about something we talked about on the radio, or maybe they just want to finally get going in the right direction on this, how do they reach you? What's the best way to do all this?
They can reach me at the office at 321-253-1667.
That number again.
321-253-1667.
Yeah, and I also want to comment that you have a really good website, FloridaElderLaw.net, and one of the resources that's there that you've published for years, I think is an excellent primer. Because I remember reading it years ago when I first, you've been helping Joe in the helping seniors world since before there was a helping seniors. You and he go back to Brevard Alzheimer's days. But I remember when I first met you as Joe was getting everything going with helping seniors, and you published a book. At that time, it was called The Orange Book, but it's a great guide to all things aging. Talk about that, because you can get it right there on your website.
Yeah, you can download it right off the website. It's called the Florida Nursing Home Long-Term Care and Nursing Home Answer Book, and you can download it right off the website. The new printed edition will be coming out shortly as part of the Boomer Guide release. Good. So
yeah, and I don't take this the wrong way, but I found it particularly well written, meaning a person like me could actually understand it. It wasn't filled with all the, like we're just talking about these nursing home contracts and things. It's not filled with legalese. It actually is very, very easy to read and follow through and understand. So you definitely want to look that up, FloridaElderLaw.net. That's where you'll find board-certified elder law attorney Bill Johnson's firm and his website information. I guess you also have where you have upcoming seminars and things like that there?
We don't have it on the website because it's also published as part of the One Senior Place.
Okay.
And they put that into the senior magazines.
Okay.
And they also put it on their website.
Okay. Well, so we're gonna close up by thanking board certified elder law attorney Bill Johnson for sharing some really, I felt, eye-opening details of things that will make us wiser and sharper as consumers out there and still get the job done. So all of that's good. Thank you, Bill, for being here. And just real quick, in the minute or so we have left, I wanted to share a couple of dates. You want to go ahead and get these on your calendar early. October 7th, Saturday, October 7th, we'll be racing back to the American Muscle Car Museum. And I am so happy to say that, among other things, the Dodge versus Chevy Challenge will return. But knowing you, Bill, I know you still like the Mazda. There's still going to be a Mazda involved. There's still going to be there's actually going to be a Kia involved, and there's actually going to be another new entry because AJ keeps building more dealerships. He's going to have a Mitsubishi dealership. So there's going to be a Mitsubishi for our winner to choose in as we get to that. But that's Saturday, October 7th. And then the other dates that you want to keep in mind, we have completely sold out our space. Actually, a whole bunch of us are going sailing on Friday on the Helping Seniors Foundation Cruise, second annual. The third annual will take place on October 12th. There's a 3-night sailing from Port Canaveral. And October 15th, there's a 7-night sailing. And so you can put them together and go with us for 3, 7, or 10 days. And that is a fundraiser for the Helping Seniors organization. And details are now starting to be available at 321-473-7770. Nancy will get you connected to the right place for that. So on behalf of Joe Steckler, our president and founder, and also Nancy Deerdorf, our operation director, our entire team, thanks for joining us for Helping Seniors Radio. We'll see you next week with Dr. Lee Sheldon on the air.